Alright guys, welcome to my first ever helicopter virtual flying lesson. I've done thousands and thousands of flying lessons for real, but this is my very first virtual one. So if you're watching this on Twitch, you'll find a link to the YouTube channel below, and if you're watching this on YouTube, then there'll be a link to Twitch below. I'm going to do the flying lessons live, so if anybody wants to come along, watch, and ask questions, etc., go to Twitch. If you just want to watch the lessons, then you'll find them on YouTube. I'm using X-Plane 10 because it has an extremely good helicopter flight model, although very, very difficult to fly. And we're going to start with exercise 4. We're starting with exercise 4, which is effects of controls, because exercise 1 and 2 are administerial, just paperwork, and exercise 3 of the syllabus is your introduction, your trial lesson, your air experience flight. So we're going to skip those because obviously we're not actually flying a real helicopter, and we're going to move on to exercise 4, effects of controls. So before we start, let's have a look at the bits that make up a helicopter, what it is and how it works. So we have the airframe of the aircraft. This holds people, cargo, bombs, bullets, engine, fuel, avionics, all that kind of stuff. Then you have your flying surfaces. Now an aeroplane has lifts. Aeroplane doesn't have lifts. Well, it might do if it's big enough. Aeroplane has wings that generate lift. A helicopter has wings. They're here, spinning around and around and around and around. So rather than the engines dragging the aircraft through the air or pushing the aircraft through the air to generate lift, the engine rotates the blades, and that's what produces lift. So our rotor disc above us is what's giving us our lift. Now the thrust that you would normally get from your engines on an aeroplane, you're also getting from the rotor disc above. So it's doing lift and forward thrust, and it's also doing pitch and roll control. So it's got a lot to do. So it's really this rotor disc at the top that's doing all the work and flying, with the airframe just hanging below. Now because it spins and because it's being turned by the engine, and if we look above, the rotor disc is going in an anti-clockwise direction, so that's the rotor blades going from right to left across the front of the aircraft. So to stop the airframe from spinning in the opposite direction, we have a tail rotor at the back, which pushes in the opposite direction. Now to control these two rotor discs, we have 3 flight controls, which we'll go through one at a time on the ground so you get an idea of what they're doing. We'll just go inside. So inside we have a cyclic stick in the middle, we have tail rotor pedals for your feet, and a collective lever for your left hand. Now where this gets a bit difficult on the simulator is obviously in the real world I use pedals with my feet, and so would you. In the simulator world I'm using the twist axis on the joystick, which if I do now you'll see the pedals moving, which is a little bit odd for me, and it does produce a little bit of cross controlling. But we'll persevere and see how we get on. The cyclic stick in the middle, I'm just using the joystick's norwards, forwards, backwards, left, right axis to control that. And the collective lever in the middle, I'm using the throttle quadrant on the joystick just to move up and down. So I'll show you what they're doing on the outside. If we start with the cyclic disc, that's the joystick in your right hand. If you look at the rotor disc and we push it forwards, see the rotor disc tilts down. That will make the aircraft pitch forwards. If we pull it back, the rotor disc will tilt back, and that'll make the helicopter pitch backwards. If we look at it from the back, and I move the stick to the left, you'll see the rotor disc tilts left, and that makes the aircraft roll. And if I move it to the right, you'll see the rotor disc tilts to the right, and that'll make it roll to the right. Now if we look sideways on again, if I gently raise the collective slightly, you'll see the tips of the blades here start to angle cone upwards with any luck, without the aircraft getting airborne. You can see if I do it quickly, you'll see the rotor disc going up and down. So as we raise and lower the collective, we're producing lift and thrust, and that's pushing the rotor disc up, which is why it's coning upwards. Now the tail rotor at the back, that's controlled with the pedals, will just make the aircraft rotate on the spot. So if I put a bit of left, it'll probably still turn on the ground. There we go, rotates left, and if I do right, just about wants to go right. The tail rotor pushes the aircraft round to the left, and the torque takes it back round to the right. So you put in left pedal, and when you're putting in right pedal, you're effectively taking out the left pedal. So if we're going to take this thing off, or take off even, if we increase power, the torque will make the aircraft rotate round to the right. I'm just going to gently increase it, and the aircraft should start turning on the spot to the right. There we go. So to stop that to take off, I need a little bit of left cyclic. Sorry, left pedal. Left cyclic comes later. Little bit of left pedal, stop the aircraft from spinning, and we'll just put it back straight again. This is quite tricky for me using a twist on a joystick rather than pedals for my feet. Now, because we've put in a whole load of left pedal and the tail rotor is now pushing the back of the aircraft to the right, as we increase power further and the aircraft comes off the ground, it will start drifting, or it will do if I can fly the thing, to the right. So we need a little bit of left cyclic, a little bit of left roll. I'm just going to put it back down again. There we go. To stop the aircraft from drifting to the right. That's why basic helicopters, like this one, will always sit with one skid slightly lower than the other. So we're going to get airborne in a second, and we're going to have a look at the effects of controls. The instruments on the inside that are worth looking at are the airspeed indicator here, the altimeter here, the vertical speed indicator here, and our power gauge, our torque, over here. So with that in mind, we're going to move back up again. Just want to see the speed, that's about it. When you're hovering, you don't really need any of your instruments, and they'll just get in the way. So we'll get airborne again, and we'll head off, and we'll start having a look at effects of controls. If I go quiet, it's because I'm really concentrating. Flight simulators on the computer are a lot harder than the real thing. So we'll head out to the runway. In fact, we won't. If anybody can recognise where we are, I'll turn the aircraft around again so you can have a look. This airfield might look familiar to a few people. Anyone who's watched videos on YouTube of me taking off and landing will know that this is Elstree. So we'll head out to our normal takeoff point, which would be on the north side of the airfield on the grass. And I've disabled the wind on the simulator, just so you get an idea of what the aircraft's doing without the wind complicating issues, and it also makes it a little bit easier to fly. So this will do. We'll head out of route alpha. Get the thing in a nice stable hover before we start, and then off we go. One of the tricky things about flying a helicopter in a flight sim is that the controls in a real helicopter are not sprung loaded, as in they don't self-center. They just stay where you put them if you're lucky. Game joystick is obviously sprung loaded and wants to go back to the middle the whole time, so I have to apply pressure the whole time to stop the joystick from just going back to the center if I let go of the thing. Yeah, it doesn't help. Nice thing about the simulator world is there's no noise abatement issues to worry about. So we'll climb up 2,000 feet and we'll head out along the motorway. I can just about free up a hand for my last bit of coffee. You struggle to do that in a real Jet Ranger. In the machine I'm normally flying, it wouldn't be a problem. This is the M1 motorway that we're following, which runs right past Elstree. And we're going to follow it up to the M25, and we'll run along the M25. So I'm hoping to do these streams Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, work allowing, starting at about 10:30 in the morning. So if you're watching this in about 10 years time, hopefully I'm still here doing this, and that virus we can't mention hasn't killed us all off, or the industry off for that matter. So that's the M25. We'll do a right turn. I'm being a bit slow with this climb, so we'll just get it up to 2,000 feet. We'll follow the M25 out towards Potter's Bar. So we'll level off at 2,000 feet, and then we'll start running through these controls one at a time. So, starting with the cyclic stick, I'm actually just going to move the view down. This won't help me, but it might help you. There it is. Actually, no, that won't work. So, if I push the stick slightly forwards, the nose of the helicopter drops. If I pull it back, the nose of the helicopter comes up. And if I move it left to right, the helicopter will roll, and because we're in forward flight, it will turn. So what do we use it for? We use it for speed and direction. If we look down, center of the console at the airspeed indicator, which is currently showing about 100 knots, if I push the stick forward and lower the nose, the airspeed will increase. And if I pull it back and raise the nose, the airspeed will decrease. The secondary effect of pitching the nose up and down is the aircraft will climb and descend. So if we're in level flight, which we are at about 80 knots, the fact that we're not going up or down means that we have enough vertical thrust, as in the lift, to overcome the weight of the aircraft. If we push the stick forward and we redirect that thrust rearwards, we get more speed, but now we don't have enough lift, and so the aircraft starts to descend. If we pull it back and we bring our speed back to 80 knots, we should be level again, and the aircraft will stop climbing. And if we raise the nose and we slow down, we now have more lift than we need, and the aircraft will start to climb. I'm just going to keep following the motorway so I don't get lost. Now, something else that's happening as we're moving the cyclic around that you may or may not have noticed, our power gauge is changing slightly. That's the one to the left of the airspeed. And the reason it's changing, as you put load through the rotor disc, the tips of the blades will cone up or down depending on whether you're using positive or negative G. And this has the effect of making the rotor disc larger or smaller. And if you think of an ice skater, when they're spinning around and around on the spot, when they pull their arms in, they go faster. Same thing happens with the helicopter. So if I push it forward, we should get a slight increase in power displayed. And if I pull it back, it should, there we are, go down again. And that's to do with the disc load, the G-force that the rotor disc is feeling. Now, we'll move on in our next lesson to speed changes, and I will point out one of the key features for speed changes. But we'll move on now to our pedals. Now, we saw on the ground the pedals control yaw. That's rotation of the aircraft around its centre axis by changing the amount of thrust coming out of its tail rotor. What we're doing in forward flight is we're trying to keep the aircraft in balance, which means if we're flying forwards, there's an airflow flowing over the aircraft, and we want to keep the helicopter pointing into that airflow rather than sort of flying sideways into it. The indications to help us do that on the aircraft, there's a little bit of white string. Let me pause it for a second. So a little bit of white string here on the centre of the windscreen, and down here is a balance indicator. You can probably get both of these in shot at the same time. So as we're flying along, we're trying to keep both the string upright and the balance ball in the middle. They're the same instrument, they're just different displays. It's easier using the string because it's in your eye line when you're looking out the window rather than the balance indicator. But if I put in some left pedal, I twist the joystick to the left, the nose goes left, ball goes out to the right, and the string goes left, and we're now flying slightly sideways. If I twist it back to the right, we go back to the middle, and if I go too far, you'll see the string comes out to the right, the ball goes out to the left, and we're doing a little bit of sideways the other way. So our aim in forward flight is just to keep the ball in the middle. So the primary effect of the pedals is to yaw the aircraft and control our balance. The secondary effects you'll get when you move the pedals, I'm not sure if this simulator will do it, but we'll give it a go. If I put in a load of left pedal, as well as yaw, we should get, yeah, there we go, some roll as well as the aircraft yaws, a bit like a fixed wing. And the same thing should happen to the right. If we yaw to the right, we should get some roll. Yes, we do. The other thing you'll get, the tail rotor, just like the main rotor, is driven by the engine. The more you ask from it, i.e. the more thrust you ask from it, the harder the engine has to work. Now we're counteracting our torque with the left pedal, so that means the tail rotor is pushing. With the right pedal, it's pushing less. So if we look at our power gauge again, the one next to the airspeed, and if I hit a whole boot of left pedal, it should go up as the engine has to work harder. There we go. And if I go the other way, in theory, it should go down. It did eventually. I'm not sure the flight model's that great, but that wasn't too bad. You can see what was happening. So recap on what we've got so far. We've got cyclic stick, the joystick, pitch and roll, controlling speed and direction. We've got pedals, or the twist motion in the joystick for yaw control, which is balance. And then finally we have a collective lever, which is what makes us go up and down. So looking at the power gauge, left of the airspeed, if I push the power up, power increases, and straight away you can see we're climbing. And if I pull it down again, power decreases and the aircraft starts descending. So the primary effect of changing power is to make the aircraft go up or down. The secondary effects, which I did an appalling job of looking after then, are twofold as well. Let me do it again and you can see what they are. If I increase power, nose comes up. If I reduce power, the nose comes down. What should also be happening, and I'm not sure that it is, we'll try it again, is we should also get a change in yaw, as in the nose should move left or right with power changes. Let's just see if it does that for the full power. Yep, a little bit. You can see the nose wants to go right with more power, so we need left pedal, and dropping it down, it wants to go the other way. You can also hear the note of the engine changing slightly, and that's because the rotor blades are either slowing down or speeding up, and then the engine's governor has to correct that, which is why you hear a change in pitch slightly. Jet engines in a jet range like this, unlike the piston engine in a Robinson, take a little bit of time to react to requests for power changes, so you'll often get a slight drop in rotor speed or rotor RPM when you increase power. Whereas with Robinson's piston engines, to provide their power almost instantaneously, so you get very little drop in RPM when you increase power, unless you do it really aggressively. So those are our flight controls. and what they do, their primary and secondary effects. So what we'll look at, we'll just head up to Enfield, which is where all the water is up here. We've come down a little bit, so we'll come all the way down to 1500 feet. That'll be our new target altitude. When you're flying a simulator or even a real helicopter, don't panic if the height's changed a little bit, the speed's changed a little bit, the heading's changed a little bit. Helicopters are inherently unstable, even simulated ones. What makes a good pilot is not the fact that they're constantly sitting on the numbers bang on all the time. It's the fact that when they notice something isn't right, you correct it rather than just ignoring it. So I want 1500 feet, so I'm going to make the necessary corrections 1500 feet, and we'll talk about how we do that next. So this is Enfield. Do a little bit round to the right and have a look at London. Well, I don't suppose it's that impressive. This is X-Plane 10 after all, it's not the latest one. Yeah, the helicopter flight model's not perfect in this game. It's pretty good. It's not quite perfect, as in you need quite a lot of rearwards joystick to keep the nose up in the turn to stop it from descending. That's more of a fixed wing thing than a helicopter thing. With a gentle turn like this, you wouldn't expect that much. So that was exercise 4, effects of controls, and we're going to move on and have a look at exercise 5, which is speed and power changes, and we'll do that as we head back towards the airfield. The aim of this exercise is to be able to change and hold different speeds and be able to make power changes without the aircraft going all over the shop like it did when I was demonstrating how it worked. So what we need now, let's get the aircraft stable at 60 knots. That will do, and just pause it there. So to change speed we need to move the nose up or down, as we saw in the last bit. But the way to control it, or to see what you're doing, you need reference points. So we're going to use this line, the horizon line in the distance, as an external reference point. And you would normally use a bit of the aircraft's cockpit as an internal reference point. But as we haven't really got anything ideal, we're going to use the mouse pointer here as our internal reference point, and imagine that's on the windscreen of the helicopter. Now the position of our horizon, oh that's handy, the position of our horizon in relation to our reference point is called the aircraft's attitude. So at the minute, if the mouse pointer was okay, so the mouse pointer is not going to work. Let's just use, yeah, I'll try and do it with both hands. Where the horizon is at the minute, that attitude is giving us 60 knots or thereabouts. If I keep the horizon in the same spot, and that mouse pointer will disappear again in a minute, but you get the idea, the aircraft will stay at 60 knots. If I want to go faster, I have to push the nose forwards, and the aircraft will speed up. However, if I do nothing else, as the aircraft accelerates, a thing called flapback will push the rotor disc back, and the nose will come up again, and the aircraft will slow down again. So in order to accelerate, what I have to do is move the horizon from where it is at 60 knots to a slightly higher position, change the attitude slightly. Then as the nose wants to come up, I need to push the cyclic slightly further forwards to keep it in the same spot. And if I keep it in the same spot, the aircraft will accelerate and maintain its new speed, which in this case 70 knots. If I push it slightly further forward again, get the horizon slightly higher, now maintain it slightly higher, the aircraft will speed up, and we're now doing 85, 90 knots of this attitude. Now if I bring the horizon back down by pulling the joystick or the cyclic backwards to a lower position, the aircraft will slow down, and if we can remember where it was for about 60 knots, the aircraft should eventually slow back down to 60 knots again. Just like the aircraft flaps back when you accelerate, it will want to flap forwards when you decelerate, meaning that once you've brought the cyclic backwards to raise the nose, as it slows down, you've got to keep bringing it backwards to maintain the same attitude. And there we are back at 60 knots. A couple of other things that happen when you speed up and slow down, or not so much in forward flight, but normally as you go from a hover into forward flight and back again. The vertical fin, let's see if we can do this without crashing. The vertical fin at the back works a bit like a rudder, in that it gives you some stability when flying forward. It's what's called your vertical stabilizer. So as you go faster, it becomes more effective, and so the effect of the pedals, so you need less pedal as you go faster, because it's taking up some of the anti-torque work from your tail rotor. So you need less pedal as you go faster and more pedal as you go slower. So that's our speed changes. The next thing we need to do is power changes. So that's raising the collective up and down. Let's find a reference point out the front. So again, we need reference points out the front, so we'll use our horizon again. We're also going to use the motorway in the distance to try and stop the aircraft from yawing left or right. And all we want to do is gently increase power. So we're going to raise the collective, so increase the throttle. We need a little bit of forward and a little bit of left pedal as we increase power to try and maintain our aircraft attitude and our yaw. And then if we decrease power, we need to do it the other way. We need a little bit of right pedal. I'm doing it very slowly, and back slightly on the joystick to stop the nose from dropping as we reduce power. If I don't do it, you'll see there the nose drops quite a bit. Now it's important that when you're moving the collective up or down, that you look out to your reference points. Yikes. That's the tricky bit of flying a flight simulator, when the joystick's going through its center position, because the load comes off the springs and then comes back on again. That's my excuse for flying badly. You need to look out at the horizon as you're making power changes or any control change, so you can see what the aircraft's doing. But obviously we don't want to exceed the limits of what we have on the aircraft. So every now and then you have a quick pause, you check inside at your flight instruments, and then you look outside again when you go to move the control. And at this point in the exercise, we're not worried about the aircraft going up or down. We're just trying to change power up and down, trying to maintain the attitude, the horizon in the same spot as we're changing it, and trying not to let the aircraft yaw, he says, as we're changing power. The other thing related to power that we haven't touched on is the throttle. Throttle in a helicopter is a lot like the throttle in an airplane with a variable pitch prop. We don't change the throttle in flight. It's always at full power. It's only the angle of the blades that's changing as we're flying around. And on the simulator, I can change the throttle, not an awful lot happens, so there's not an awful lot of point covering that control, other than to say it's pretty much a ground use only thing. Airfield's over there, so we haven't got ourselves lost. So what we'll do, we'll follow the motorway back towards the airfield. Try not to embarrass myself with a poor landing. And then what we might do is we might change it up. We might do a flight over London, as Elstree is just north of London, but we'll do it in the dark. So to recap what we've covered, exercise 4, effective controls. You have pitch and roll, control with the cyclic, controlling speed and direction. You have yaw, that's rotating left and right, control with the pedals or the twist of the joystick left and right. And you have power, which is the collective up and down with the throttle. And then speed and power changes, we move the horizon up or down by changing pitch to control how fast we're going. And as we increase and decrease power, we look out to the horizon, maintain the attitude, and adjust our feet or the twist of the joystick to control the yaw. Because it's a computer game, if you just dump the nose and try and build speed, yes, the aircraft accelerates quickly, but you have no control of where the speed is going to, because you can't see the horizon. The speed will either increase or decrease rapidly, and you can't control what it's going to stop at. Only by making small changes to your attitude, the horizon out the window, will you be able to control how fast the aircraft's actually going. So that's the M1, pick that up, and we'll head back the same way we came out. And then in our next lesson, we're going to look at straight and level flight. So that's controlling the aircraft at different speeds without it going up or down, and climbing and descending. But we'll head back to the airfield, we'll change it up to a night flight, and then we'll cruise over London in the dark. So this would be route alpha again, back to the airfield. We're probably a little bit low. Altitude's 300 feet. We want to be 500 feet by the time we get to the helicopter circuit. So 800 feet is probably about right. We probably don't want to get there until we sort of get to this junction. This junction here is the M1 A41 junction at Watford. Ooh, there's a police car. Check that out. Wasn't me, officer, and you can't prove it. There's the airfield. As we're approaching in the real world, I'll be looking to the right at this point for any fixed wing on final approach. And we'll start reducing power. Also got to bring the nose up and reduce speed. I may have left this a little bit late, but we'll see how we get on. This is where I go awfully quiet as I'm trying to concentrate. In the real world, I can do this with one eye closed and probably one hand behind my back. In the simulator world, not so much. In the real world, you get depth perception, which helps out with your hovering. Again, not so much in the simulator world, but I don't think this is too terrible. As the aircraft comes to a stop, it's going to sink. And I'm going to need a whole load of left pedal because our vertical stabilizer is no longer working because we're not flying forwards. Don't think that was too terrible. And we will try, in a quite embarrassing fashion, to hover over to the helipad and put the aircraft down again. The reason I moved the instruments out of the way, there's nothing apart from the power gauge that's of any relevance when you're hovering. So you want to just be looking out the window. So in the simulator world, you want as much unobstructed view as you can get. We'll try and touch down without a bang. There we go. And I can breathe for a second.